Anyway, so thank you for everyone who came tonight, especially the students from MRU. Really appreciate you being here. Also, the sign-up sheets are with AB, who's somewhere around. So if you haven't signed up, AB's at the top. So you can go and sign those before you leave. Make sure to do that. And if non-MRU students want to sign the sign sheets, that's okay. But yeah, that won't amount to much. So today I'm here to share about a project that I've been developing with my colleague Rubén Forte, who's currently sleeping in Japan, and he's doing a study there. He's a big traveler. That's something we've been working on together for quite a while that builds on his previous work there, so it's really important to acknowledge his importance to this project. It's really teamwork from the investigative part on both of us, but really it's a project about Doloreños, the people of Dolores, and it's, in that sense, it's highly collaborative, and I think this is going to be reflected today. I also want to warn that I'm going to show some short clip videos that are in Spanish with no subtitles, and so I'm sorry for those who don't speak Spanish, but I will maybe pause and explain what's going on, and definitely at the end kind of give a gist, try to get the gist for the whole excerpt, but I think it's important to show them because I want people to have a little better understanding of the people we work with, because today is about them more than anything. And so as we move on to the Maya world, this is a photo from a year and a few months ago at the archaeological site of Ixcum, which is located near Dolores, where we are chatting with Don Lechuga. He goes by Don Lechuga, and he has worked there in a few ways, most importantly as a guardian or as a groundskeeper, basically. And he's telling us about that experience. And then as we move towards the Maya world, I want to just take a second to, I'm not going to do a full land acknowledgement, but I just want to acknowledge the fact that Calgary is a big city, and we're definitely in the heart of it. But also, we are located on traditional indigenous lands, and we don't have to go very far outside the city to witness that and to see that and to reconnect with that. And I want us to always keep that in mind when we talk about archaeology in the past. But today is going to take us to the Maya world, which is an amazing place that is, for those who are not super familiar with it, basically it can be defined either as Southeast Mesoamerica, but that's a technical term, or just Northern Central America. It's composed of southeastern Mexico, the southeastern states of Chiapas, Campeche, Yucatan, and Quintana Roo, and parts of Tabasco as well, and then the entire country of Guatemala, the entire country of Belize, and then western Honduras and El Salvador. And it is a very amazing place to visit. It's also a place that is very much so alive today. Maya people are all over this area in number in the millions. They speak 30 different languages. They're very much so there. The Maya did not disappear, okay, though of course I'm sure the vast majority of people know that here, but it's still something we must repeat. All that said, the identity associated with Maya indigeneity is a little complex, very complex, and it varies a lot depending where you are in the Maya world. And where we're going today, the vast majority of people are very much so descendants of Maya people, descendant of people who felt Maya, but they themselves typically don't ascribe to Maya identity. They tend to think of themselves as the closest thing in Canada would be Métis, probably, and this is that they're Ladinos or Mestizos, but they don't feel indigenous. So that's something else to kind of highlight. They don't speak indigenous languages, the majority of them, but their parents or their grandparents all did. So the concept of slow archaeology is weird for many reasons, because while the nature of archaeological research is in itself a slow process requiring time to secure funding and permits, conduct preliminary research, complete field work, analyze cultural material, and publish results, teach about them, and the whole merry-go-round. Practitioners of slow archaeology assert that this process is not slow enough. And so that might be a little aggravating for some. But this new movement is urging archaeologists to slow this process down even further, placing an emphasis on knowledge production, long-term activism, and taking time to understand both the unique physical environment and complicated heritage of the sites and people we study. And so this is what I have the privilege of being able to do at Mount Royal University, which gives me a lot of latitude in what it is I want to do for my research. And so I really appreciate that. And it's also a model, slow archaeology, that doesn't jive with a lot of the current academic model. For example, it would be very hard for a graduate student, for example, in their limited time frame of a PhD research, especially in master's research, to attempt anything close to slow archaeology, unless it was as a small part of this project. So I recognize that, and as a junior scholar who's now has a professor gig, I have this privilege to do it. So I'm just taking the time to do it. I am tempted to go and then do archaeology and dig and do stuff, and I've had opportunities to do so. I've considered doing so, but this is the decision I've made, and I'm so far very happy. And so I hope I convey that today. And this is a quote from Ayanna Flewellen, one of the only people who's really published about slow archaeology. It's a very kind of new topic, if not that groundbreaking in concept. And so this is a photograph from the archives of the Middle American Research Institute, based at Tulane University, where I worked for a long time during my graduate work. And MARI, and for short, Middle American Research Institute, is an amazing place, and Tulane is as well. But it's also one of the places where it's most obvious that archaeology is deeply rooted in colonialism. MARI was funded by Samuel Zemery and the owners of the United Fruit Company, who owned most of Central America at the time. And turns out that his daughter, who would become a prominent archaeologist, Doris Stone, was very interested in the archaeology that was present under the banana plantations where they were living. And so she asked her father to donate money to create this research institute that was created, and proceeded to bring all kinds of collections back to New Orleans to study them. Anyway, and so these are photographs of Franz Blom, who's there kneeling next to an ancient Maya monument at the site of Uxmal in Yucatan, in Mexico. And this is basically pioneering, super complicated to do night photography, which helps decipher monuments with raking lights. This is really complex. So we're talking about, I'm not sure what the year is here, but it's the 1920s. And so this is a glass plate. That's why it's so beautiful. It's also a kind of photograph that you have to use very long exposure. You have to stay still for a long time to take these photos. And so the three white guys there are kneeling and sitting still in positions that are clearly made for being comfortable to stay still. However, maybe you can see in the top right, there's kind of two ghosts there. And so those are two Maya people who were part of this project, who undoubtedly were told to get out of the frame as the photo was being taken. And since they moved, we only see them captured a little bit. And so I feel that this photograph, which is very interesting for scholastic purposes and our academic purposes, is also a very good emblem of how strange the colonialism of Maya archaeology is and can be. So archaeology was founded in colonialism, and it's a reality. We just can't get away from it, and we have to face it and accept it and come to terms with it, and maybe try to do our part in trying to deconstruct that. And so this is a quote from Avishnin Cortiren, who's an indigenous activist scholar here in Canada, but she's originally from Highland, Guatemala. Archaeology can be used to write history, providing essential benefits or detrimental stereotypes of Maya communities. Archaeologists who practice in Guatemala have a call to be more ethical towards the descendant communities that they work in, especially in the field of interpretation and creation of theories about Maya history. Maya people are affected by the knowledge produced in archaeology, and they have an inherent right to forge their own identity through history. And so this applies to Maya people, all Maya people, but also I think at any heritage community. This is something we can really extend to much broader strokes than just in the Maya case. And this was written in 2009, so a while ago. And so who gets credit for archaeological discoveries? Well, mostly archaeologists. That's me. In this case, this is a photograph of me and my dear advisor for my PhD, Dr. Marcelo Canuto, who I worked on the Proyecto Regional Archaeological La Corona in northwest Petén in Guatemala, and we were incredibly fortunate to discover some absolutely gorgeous pieces of ancient Maya art and history, because the ancient Maya, as you may know, have a writing system, hieroglyphic Maya writing system, which is a very accurate way to record language and events. I don't want to go too much in depth here, but the point is that the people who benefit from these are archaeologists who arguably work very, very hard to secure funding and to direct these projects, and it's an extremely complex process to lead an archaeological project abroad. So it definitely, we're definitely okay in claiming credit for that and publishing it and elevating it and caring for it. And of course, not getting paid money for these monuments, right? This is, it's academic credit. However, of course, there's a lot of people who work on archaeological projects who don't get much credit. They do get a lot of pleasure and pride, typically, in being involved in those discoveries. This is the same monument we were just seeing here between us. You can sort of see it a little still covered in dirt there between the three of us. And so this is Demetrio and Francisco, two Doloreños that I was working with at La Corona. And so, of course, the people who don't get much credit in these discoveries are the people we call grassroots archaeologists, the people who are the practitioners of archaeology, who are professionals in the field, but who did not go through the same kind of trainings that we did as scholars. They don't. Many of them don't have elementary school education. Some of them have a BA, basically, a few though, and a lot of them will have high school as well, but not all of them. And so this is also the team cleaning it up, the bigger team that was working there. So the same two excavators and their two assistants. And so, yeah, and then another example. Here we are at a different beautiful monument that we found the following year. The previous one was 2015. This is 2016, and there I am with my now wife, Mary Kate Kelly, posing next to element 59, which was amazingly preserved. And it's hard to tell from the photograph, but behind us is a looter's trench. So this is a site that was heavily looted in the 1960s and 70s, and that one barely escaped the damage done by looters. And so it's particularly special monument to find that preserved its red paint, which is extremely rare. And I could talk for a long time about these monuments, and that would be for a different talk or lecture. But then, of course, there's also, again, the team of archaeologists involved in it. We see Francisco again here. No, that was Demetrio. So this is the first time we see Francisco and Fabio there in the middle, and two assistants as well from San Andres. And so hieroglyphic monuments we found at La Corona between 2013 and 2016 as part of my doctoral research and there's 7 of them are now housed in the Guatemalan National Museum of Archaeology in the state capital, about over 500 kilometers away from La Corona by road. It's quite anything we find at archaeological sites, it has to go to a lab and be processed there before it's eventually turned into the hands of the government. But that's all done at a federal level, so of course it's far away from the local communities. These have been published now over a dozen times by typically Global North, but also Latin American and Guatemalan university-trained archaeologists. Definitely helped me secure my job at MRU. There's no doubt about that. It did not hurt. Yeah, but these monuments, despite how incredible they are, they don't bring any actual economic, besides the salary that those workers are paid to excavate, but it would have been paid the same salary had they just been thinking a test pit, right? That had nothing in it. They don't bring intellectual much, unfortunately, and cultural benefits to Petén grassroots archaeologists. Of course, it's very good for their pedigree as professionals in the field, and something they carry with them, and that can help them continue to be employed, but it's not the same. And so, looking at this in terms of proportion is another way to do it. So just an example, this is the following year. That year we did not find any hieroglyphic monument, so I'm not showing those, but that was 2017. And there I am with Marisa Lopez, who was an undergraduate student a licenciatura student from Universidad del Valle de Guatemala, so she's Guatemalan. So the 2 out of 12 on the team that year, so 17% more or less. And then there are 5 excavators from Dolores and 5 assistants from San Andres, and so representing more or less 83% of the team. And so despite the fact that I wasn't paid at all to be there, in fact I was paying to be there, but down the line though, all the data that comes out is sort of my property, intellectually speaking, and benefits me at the career level, and to a certain degree was very formative for the undergraduates too. So I'm not saying that this is entirely extractive, and that's something that that is a displeasure to the people who work there. No, quite the opposite. Digging an archaeological site for Peteneros, for people from Petén, from Guatemala, is an extraordinary opportunity in many ways. They get to live as big groups on the field. We would have sort of a little town of tents where they lived. They have a great time. They're well fed. They get time to rest. They get this really nice social group. They connect between 2 towns, the towns of San Andres and Dolores. They make friends. They just have a good time in general, and they paid better than in most, basically any job that they could do back at home. But it is a seasonal job, so they're dependent on it on a seasonal basis, very similar to kind of agricultural kind of work that's based on a seasonal or tourism based work. It's all tied to the influx of people, and that's something that of course works for a long time, but eventually you can have something like a pandemic that really throws everything up in the air, stops projects, people lose funding, agencies can't fund anymore, and so these projects die away, and nowadays a lot of these men don't have work anymore in archaeology, unfortunately, and we'll hear a bit about that later. And so this is a map of Guatemala, where you can kind of notice that a huge chunk of Guatemala is called Petén. It is the sort of the wild west, if you will, of Guatemala, although it's not wild, it's called the wild north. And it is this massive, we could talk about this map for a long time, and I won't, I swear, but the red line outlines this natural preserve that's currently under threat by invaders, so that's another totally different story. But it's largely uninhabited as an area. It's quite rural. There are still sizable towns and cities for sure, but it's very different from a lot of parts of Central America in that sense. And that's where the bulk, a lot of the very famous classic Maya sites are located. At least the Guatemalan ones. Of course, there's plenty of them outside of Guatemala. And then also Petén is home to basically the 2nd largest rainforest in the Americas after the Amazon. And then we have the 2 towns, San Andres, which is located near it and manages a part of the forest associated with La Corona, and that's why we hire a lot of people from there. And then the town of Dolores, which is located further down southeast, quite a ways away from La Corona. And it's a little strange. It was very strange to me at first to try to figure out why were Doloreños, why were there so many Doloreños working with us at La Corona. So I got to work with these guys, a total of, 6 months in the field or something like that, 8 months in the field over 5 years, and got to know them, and they invited us home at their home, and they really wanted us to come visit them in Dolores, so we did. And that's partly how this story started. And so Dolores is located in Petén, and Petén is the lowlands. However, it is located in sort of what I affectionately call the Appalachians of the Maya world, the so-called Maya Mountains. It's kind of low-lying old mountains versus the really tall volcanic highlands. And so we can appreciate this here, how it's quite hilly in that area. And we're standing on top of a hill right now. Looking here, we're standing in front of the museum there, and most of the town is located to the front and to the right, and then there's the colonial church of Dolores, which is the only colonial church in all of Petén, dated to, I forget, 1730 something, and it's a fine place to be. It's very quaint. It's located off the highway, so it's very few passerbys. It's quieter than most towns in the area. It's also safer. It's a beautiful place to be, but it's also a small rural town with all the issues that come with that. And this is where we were standing in front of just in front of this museum, which is the Museo Regional del Sureste de Petén. And to have an archaeology museum in a small Petén town is very unusual. This is not something that can be said of any other town in Petén, maybe outside of one, and it's a very recent museum, and it's not nearly as cool as this one. And so there's very few museums in the area, so that's kind of unusual, and that's part of the story as well. Dolores is not a normal town in Petén. This is where we stay when we go there, the only hotel in town. Hotel Mi Recuerdo. We're talking about a town about 20,000 people if you take all the suburbs or the outlying hamlets and all. And to have only one real hotel in such a sizable area is pretty unusual. And that's because, as I was saying, it's off the path. There's no tourists that get there. Few tradespeople come here as well. And there's only one ATM that you can see right there, the Ban Rural, which did not work last summer. We got creative, and then like the closest ATM was like 30 kilometers, and it took, but we did it. Yeah, other story. And so this is where we live, and it's pretty nice to be there. So what is it that we're doing? So finally getting there. Sorry it took so long, but here we go. So the Dolores Slow Archaeology Program, we have a radical proposal. Transform the traditional paradigm of archaeological research design by first dedicating at least 3 years to ethnographic research with the Dolores heritage community before launching an archaeological phase. And so the idea is to result in community engagement in a few ways. Most importantly, we want to involve the grassroots archaeologists, the grassroots archaeological Dolores community in the design of a local project. We want to empower grassroots archaeologists during ethnographic and archaeological phases of the project. There's a lot of sub-point here, of course. Give the community further agency in the analysis and interpretation of finds, kind of coming back to what we were speaking at the beginning, and in the dissemination of knowledge. And throughout this process, celebrate the grassroots archaeologists as a community of practice within the socioeconomic matrix of Dolores, because that's the other part. A lot of people there know that there's people who do archaeology because it is a very important source of employment. However, kind of because of the lack of perhaps sort of organized labor, then there's no union or there's no guild or there's nothing like that. There's kind of a lack of sort of unity. And even the museum isn't really a kind of a centralizing place for the community. So that's something we want to understand, not necessarily fix, because maybe they don't want to. But try to understand that and why. Despite the fact that there's we think over 150 probably people associated with the field of archaeology in this town. So our ethnographic research that we're currently leading there, where we just finished our second full season, we're documenting 3 broad themes, and this is research that's authorized by HREB of MRU, so the Humans Research Ethics Board. So it's all okay to do this research. The history, we want to document the history of Dolores individuals, families, and of their broader grassroots community of archaeological practice. And we want to document how Doloreños perceive archaeology as work and how they feel about their relationships with us, researchers, academics, professionals, whatever you want to call it. And we want to study how Doloreños perceive their surrounding archaeological landscape and how they'd like to see it investigated. So we're still learning about this, so it's something we constantly learn more every interview, and we haven't finished yet, so we're not ready to kind of finalize everything, but we're starting to have a pretty good idea, and it's crazy how much progress we've made. So we're assembling a comprehensive history of the rich archaeological involvement of the community, which goes back, as we now go, to 1979. To study how the Doloreños have contributed to the greater Maya archaeological community by investigating both famous and local sites, and to elevate their community of practice at the local level and beyond. And so this is a little map that I updated recently that shows all the archaeological sites across Guatemala and some in Belize where the Doloreños have worked. And so since 1979, they've worked at and those are mostly sites outside of the Dolores region because there's dozens and dozens of local sites as well, which we'll see some of those later. So they've worked at a lot of places with a lot of projects and a lot of very famous archaeologists, both Guatemalans and international, from the United States, Canada, some people in this room, no doubt. And so it's pretty cool for that. We're constantly adding new sites to this map, so I've updated it a few times. And so one thing that really is central now, we're realizing just how central it is there's one person who's had a very intense impact on Dolores, and his name is Juan Pedro Laporte, or Molina Laporte. And so, or no, Laporte Molina, sorry. He directed the Proyecto Nacional Tikal between 1979 and 1982, for which he hired up to over 200 Doloreños. At some point, there were over 300 people working at that site on this project. And this is when there were very few towns in Petén, and Dolores was relatively close to Tikal. And so a lot of people needed jobs at that moment, so they just went with him and worked there and learned the craft from him. He was himself trained at University of Arizona and UNAM in Mexico City. Extremely talented archaeologist who basically, by teaching how to do archaeology to all these earlier Doloreños, absolutely transformed the practice of archaeology in Guatemala, because these grassroots archaeologists have spent much more time than us gringos working at these sites. And so he's had such a tremendous impact on archaeology there. And he's a very beloved figure who was only called Juan Pedro or JP in Dolores, never asking to be called doctor. So kind of going against the grain and in sort of a very formal, traditional Guatemalan society. He then continued on to Oaxac, hiring scores of Doloreños, and eventually relocated to Dolores, built a house there, and founded the Atlas Archaeological de Petén in 1985, which would continue to work in Tikal and other places outside of Dolores, but really focus on southeast Petén and that area. And so here he is in his office, which now is a bar called Don Gato, where I may have been. And so he also, towards the end of his life, well, that was the later, like it was a long-term project, so he worked on this for quite a long time, but it was, he co-founded a museum that opened in 2007 called the Museo Regional del Sureste de Petén, which was renamed in his honor upon his death in 2010, so I never got to meet him. But it's now called, the full name is crazy, it's very Guatemalan. It's called Museo Regional del Sureste de Petén, Juan Pedro Laporte Molina. It's very long. I generally call it Sureste de Petén, but it has his name on the door. And so this is him forming some undergraduate students through his projects in the area. And so thus he created a large grassroots archaeological community in Dolores. So anytime you talk archaeology, El Doctor or Juan Pedro comes up in the area. Some people still talk about him being alive, not because they don't know that he's passed, but just because he's so important. And so that's the first person we're going to hear from today. His name is Don Juan Pacay. He is perhaps the best grassroots archaeologist I ever worked with. He's insanely talented. He was, I think, 86 by the time when I was working with him. And now he doesn't actively work anymore, although I'm sure he would if his family would let him. And so let's hear a little bit from Don Juan Pacay. Again, this is in Spanish. It's not very long, but I would like everyone to kind of hear him. I truly love this person.
¿Qué es su experiencia en arqueología? ¿Cuánto tiempo ha sido haciendo arqueología?
Trabajar en arqueología, en el 81 empecé con el licenciado Juan Pedro, el que tiene el proyecto aquí.
Ajá.
En el 81.
¿Dónde? ¿A dónde?
En Tikal.
¿En Tikal?
Sí.
Sí.
Ahí trabajé en Tikal, de ahí empezó el proyecto en Oaxac, nos trasladaron allá a seguir trabajando. De ahí terminó, como a los 8 años terminó el proyecto y nos trasladaron para Ayashá.
¿Ayashá?
Sí.
¿Y después?
Después, al Naranjo, adelante. Después trabajé un proyecto con la licenciada Vilma Fialco.
Ajá.
De Tikal hasta el Naranjo, una brecha transecto-hostal.
Ajá.
Ahí
proyecto Triángulo.
Sí, Triángulo, eso es, por ahí es. En un año.
Okay, so that was a very short part of the list of sites he's worked at, just the beginning, which is the old timers always start with this story. Is that they first worked in Tikal with Juan Pedro, and he took them to Huaxactún, and eventually they kind of branch out. There's two paths. Either they branch out and work a bunch of other places, often starting in Piedras Negras and in the Betish Batún area with people like Dr. Steve Houston and other very famous archaeologists, or they come back to Dolores and work with Juan Pedro in the local Atlas Archaeological de Petén. And so we'll hear from other grassroots archaeologists as we continue this talk. And so the second theme we're investigating, I was mentioning, is to better understand how grassroots archaeologists conceive of their work and how it compares to their other jobs. And so here I am with Fabio, probably our best friend in Dolores. Fabio, I brought him a hat from MRU. He was happy. Trucker hat, like with a grill at the back. He was happy about that, the mesh. And so he is a fruit vendor. So he is there. We kind of see his pickup truck at the back, and just behind his left shoulder, and you can sort of see above his little plastic tarp. And so that's covering his fruit. And so he sells cut fruit and fresh fruit, and his pickup truck is always full of fruit. And this year he was asked to go to the field again, but he had just filled his pickup truck with fruit, so he couldn't leave. So he had to sell it, and so he missed the boat to go work at La Corona again. He is an amazing worker, and he was, you might have, maybe you recognize him, we saw him earlier in some of the photos. And so he is in the middle of downtown. He talks to everyone, he's always there 7 days a week, maybe 6 days a week, and on slow weeks. And he's our main informant. Like when we say we want to talk with this guy, you tell him, and no, that guy shows up on your doorstep, right, the next day at the latest, or finds you at the bar and knows where. It's funny how now people know who we are, and they find us, they want to meet us and talk to us. And so it's pretty cool. And so, but the point is that besides being a grassroots archaeologist, he's a fruit vendor, and that's pretty unusual profession for them. Most of them don't necessarily do that. The vast majority work in agriculture and maybe in construction. And so the other part is to critically examine the community's relationship with academically trained archaeologists to eliminate the state of archaeological practice in Guatemala. The goal here is to, by the way, that's Don Juan Pacay there, and I and our assistant excavating a burial in La Corona, is to help us define more inclusive and decolonized practices for archaeological knowledge production and heritage preservation. And so let's hear from those two fellows, Don Marcelo Cano and Don Tirso Aníbal Aldana Rodriguez, although we're definitely going to hear mostly from Don Tirso, who speaks a lot more. And that we do a lot of those team interviews. You'll see another one. Those are just buddies that hang out, so they came together. It's also based on their availability. And so this one is slightly longer, but it's a fun one, so I hope.
Bueno, como dice el compañero, pues la arqueología es un trabajo para mí muy bonito. Y otra es de que nosotros somos excavadores con licencia, le decimos, ¿va? Porque nosotros vamos trabajando despacio, con cuidado.
So throughout this video, he defines himself as an excavator with a license, not in reference to a degree, but rather they have the right to do this, and they put themselves in contradistinction with looters.
Alguna piedra que sale, que le miramos que entonces nosotros le avisamos al arqueólogo, ¿va? Luego llega él y la dibuja, y entonces nos ordena que la quitemos y seguimos, ¿va? Seguimos, porque hay varios pisos, no solo uno, ¿va? Dibujan los pisos y nos dicen rompan aquí y sale otro piso, por lo menos en los pozos. En los pozos hay cantidad de pisos, hasta que uno le llega a la roca, ¿va? Porque esa es la base de los pozos, llegar a la roca. Sí, pues.
So I could let this go for a long time, but I'll cut it here because I want to be cognizant of time and of people who don't speak Spanish. But he's talking about what they do as archaeologists, and that's a very common thing we record in our interviews, which is what kind of work they do, what they're specialized in. And so he's describing, and they love excavating architecture, finding walls, finding doorways, finding benches, finding floors, And then he says if the archaeologists ask for it, then you go through that floor, and then there might be another floor underneath, and then eventually you might find a burial, and that's good. And so the description of the process is very important to them, and that's like archaeology from their perspective. And so that's something interesting that we're documenting. And then someone else we interviewed this summer is someone who's not, unlike most grassroots archaeologists in Dolores, she's a woman first. Out of 36 interviews, we have one woman so far, and it is the licenciada Mara Reyes, who is not from Dolores itself. She's from Petén, but she went to school to study archaeology, but has been living in Dolores, for a very long time, and did her licenciatura work, her studies for undergraduate with Juan Pedro.
Para usted, ¿cuál es el aspecto el más importante de la arqueología?
Para mí, uno de los aspectos más importantes debe ser el que nuestro trabajo en la arqueología fortalezca la identidad de los pueblos, el fortalecimiento de esa identidad de los pueblos. Ese es nuestro verdadero enfoque, debería de ser nuestro verdadero enfoque. Está bien hacer pozos de sondeo y conocer cronología, pero ¿de qué nos sirven todos estos datos si no aportamos a ese conocimiento a los pueblos, verdad? Entonces, creo que eso es para mí, el fortalecer identitariamente a nuestros pueblos.
So this was very interesting to hear that from Mara, who we collaborate with closely. We always ask, what's the most important thing in archaeology for you? And what she said is well, it's to strengthen the identity and the people, and the people, the people and the towns and the. I'm having a struggling moment for translating, but the pueblos, the people. It's to strengthen people's identity and pride in their landscape and their heritage. And she said it's really good to do excavations, but why do we do all this? Just to produce data? No, we really need to tie more with the people on the land. And from someone who's been working, running the Atlas in Dolores, it's really interesting to hear that. And it's clearly not something that's always prioritized in research. And so the third team is to study the Dolores archaeological landscape, to better understand how Doloreños perceive their surrounding heritage. And here we are with Walter Joel Heredia, who's perhaps our closest collaborator. He's the master guide at the museum. He's also a high school teacher in tourism, knows a lot of people, and his family has really deep roots in Dolores. I didn't go over that part, but we also are very interested in how people got to Dolores and their ancestral ties. And then he took us to a site called Sacul, which is pretty far away from Dolores, but still very important near the Belize border. And that was our first summer there. And so we want to solicit the community's opinions and wishes regarding the development of a local archaeological project. And so this is us with Don Alexis Eduardo Chancorso, who works for the Atlas and has spent years excavating at those sites with his son and our driver Douglas. And here we are at the site of Ixtonton, which is the closest site to downtown. It's a site that Doloreños have a lot of interest in. That seems to be a fairly good candidate for a project in the future. And so, but what we're doing right now is basically we want to identify a site that is of particular interest to the community and define a collaborative approach to research design, data interpretation, and dissemination of archaeological knowledge. And so, and there we are again with Don Lechuga and Ixcún, another site. And so the Dolores archaeological landscape is quite dense. So this is a local map, and so you can appreciate how many sites are, like this is 5 kilometers as a scale, how many sites are there. So if you look at the top, you'll see Ixcún, right close is Ixtonton. Sacul is all the way there by the Rio Sacul. And so those are some of the bigger sites. There's Ixtuts as well on the left, Curucuits, that are the bigger sites. But there's a lot of small sites, and all of these sites have been studied by the Atlas. They're all been documented somewhat, but very few have been fully excavated, well excavated or published. And so this is the last people we're going to hear from today. I love, one of my favorite things in these projects is we get a lot of teams of brothers and father and son, and that's one such team. It's Don Luis Alejandro Tzin and Don Luis Tranquilino Tzin Rodriguez. And so we're going to hear from both of them. and I'm going to have to take a pause during that video to explain something, but it's one of my favorite excerpts from this summer.
Sí, pues a mí me gustaría, o sea que me gusta más el sitio de Istontón, porque tiene bastantes montículos y tiene varias donde trabajar, ¿va? Y lo que es Xcún casi no tiene muchos montículos, y lo que tiene es las estelas y todo, ¿va? Pero no tiene bastantes montículos como trabajar.
Tiene una acrópolis, ¿no?
Ajá, sí.
Es muy, no está limpio.
No, está bastante. Ajá, pero sí me gusta ese sitio, entonces sí está bonito para trabajar.
Es bonito monte.
So he's talking about, Luis here is talking about, I was asking, what side would you excavate if you get a chance? And he says Ixtonton. I really love the architecture there. There's lots of big mounds. The other site that's famous is Ixcún, but he said not much architecture. They have really nice steeling, but it doesn't have the same archaeological potential.
Ajá. Sí,
Yo ahí sembraba yo maíz antes. Ajá. Ahí trabajaba yo.
¿En Ixtontón?
Sí. Hasta que había un montículo más alto que este. Hasta arriba le metía yo maíz, sembraba yo maíz.
Ah, sí.
Sí. Después, ¿sabes cómo fue que lo llegaron a descubrir?
So what he just said is really funny. It's like the funniest segue. He's like, yeah, I used to plant corn in Ixtonton. And they were like, what? There's like a long pause, and we're just trying to compute what you just said. And so basically, I'm going to let it go, but he's basically explaining that before archaeology occurred there, he didn't realize that Ixtonton was an archaeological site. So the mounds there are so big. There's one that's 45 meters in height. And so he said, we just thought it was hills, and we were just planting corn. And that was before the archaeology was being done there. And so you can see, and now he's an excavator, and he's worked on all kinds of sites. And so it's really interesting to see the journey that they've had professionally.
¿Usted se broma allá antes que se
Sí.
Antes de que estuviera ahí en IDAE?
Ajá. Yo trabajaba.
El grupo triádico de 45 metros.
Yo trabajaba ahí.
¿Y eso fue antes de que se fuera a trabajar con Juan Pedro?
Antes. Sí. Y yo ni sabía de montículo ni nada.
Anyway, so that's what I was explaining. They're laughing about it. What's funny is he had never told his son. And that's his son learned that there and then. So that was pretty cool. Anyway, so we're getting towards the end here. So something that we're playing with as a concept. I've always been a big fan of ethnoarchaeology, and my students know that. So the traditional definition of ethnoarchaeology is using ethnographic methods to document modern cultures from a materialist perspective in order to better understand archaeological material cultures. And that's something that's been done productively in many places, also has been done in bad ways other places. The direct historical approach can come with a bad baggage, and a colonialist one. But studies like Robert Walkups, who for a while was a director of MARI. Oh no, he was never director, but he worked at MARI for a long time, or was it? No, he was director. Yeah, that's right, he was for quite a bit. And so he did a study of modern Maya houses in the highlands of Guatemala and the lowlands as well. And that really has helped us archaeologists understand how ancient Maya houses. And then another professor from Tulane, Robert Hill, here, when he was a PhD student, with his advisor, Rubén, studied traditional pottery of Guatemala, which is a very important book that I'm going to use tomorrow in my class about ceramics. And so it can be done a great, a very good way, and I don't have any issues necessarily with ethnoarchaeology as traditionally defined, but we're kind of using it in a different way, where it's like, we're using ethnographic methods now as the first phase of an archaeological program in order to adequately understand and connect with heritage groups that live in the archaeological region of study. So I think it is ethnoarchaeology, it's just a slightly different twist on it. But I think we can productively think about that as a sort of a sister term to that of slow archaeology. And so let's talk a little bit about what we've done and what we will do, and then I'll end there. So we've now had a continued presence for DSAP, not ASAP, but DSAP, the Dolores Slow Archaeology Project, at Dolores since the summer of 2022. 2 ethnographic field seasons in June and July 23 and 24. We've interviewed 36 grassroots archaeologists and established a positive relationship with the community and its institutions, the Museo and the Atlas. And we documented their history, professional lives, ideas, and opinions about the future local archaeological project. And this is a work in progress by nature. Okay, so I'm reporting now what we have, and things may change. We also have an article in the press about our first field season. So that's more methodological in scope. And so this is something that's going to keep transforming, and we definitely want to produce some form of ethnographic documentary with all these amazing interviews we have recorded. We plan a final ethnographic season in 2025, for which I submitted a grant application with National Geographic. So if you know someone at Nat Geo, please put it in a good word for me. We hope to launch archaeological investigations in 26 or 27, pending funding. Again, good words are always welcome. This will go through SHRC probably. And with this project, the goal that has now emerged in a very systematic fashion in every interview we do with Doloreños is what the desire is that we don't just excavate a site, that we reconstruct the site reconstruct the architecture, make it beautiful and appealing to tourism in order to contribute to the stagnant economy of Dolores, which is kind of lacking in many ways. So they really want tourists to come and to visit their town, discover it, and of course help monetarily for everyone, create jobs for them and their kids so they don't have to leave Dolores. And also, of course, this would be a boon for the museum and for the Atlas. And so we're collaborating not just with the grassroots community per se, but also with the institutions there. And so that's basically what we're accomplishing. And then I like this photo because this is Rubencito. There he is as an undergraduate student in 2015. When we found some of those cool monuments with the team there. And so he's not with us today, but hi, Rubén. And thanks for your work. And this is the whole team that year. And then this is everyone I worked with closely for those 4 years, doing effectively what could be called in ethnographic term, participant observation with this community. So we really kind of have interesting knowledge there that we're sharing with them. And I just want to put in a plug for the journal, The Minus, which I edit. Just Google The Minus to find it. It's the easiest way to find it. And you'll land on the nonprofit page that houses the journal, afar. And the next issue that's coming out in a few weeks is the first entirely Spanish language issue. It's entirely dedicated to the Dolores region, and it's guest edited by Mara Reyes, who we met today. It features an article by her and also Walter Hol about the history, the colonial history of the town, and it will be published in a few weeks. And so please look it up. And The Minus is entirely open access, and it is free to download. We're translating a lot of articles from English to Spanish to make them accessible to the people in Latin America, and it's also beautifully illustrated. So that makes it even more appealing to everyone. And the artist is the only person the artists are the only people who get paid in this process. Well, no, so some copy editors get paid as well. And I want to express my deepest gratitude to the many Doloreños who continue to welcome us with open arms upon our visits. With special thanks to Walter Tito Hoyle Heredia and Mara Reyes. Thank you to the Archaeological Society of Alberta for their invitation to present today. It's an honor to be here. And thank you to MRU's Internal Research Grant Fund and to the SHRC's Explore Grant for supporting this research. Thank you so much.